Grand evening, everyone. It is Wednesday, May 27th, 2026. It is 1700 hours and 30 minutes Central Daylight Time as we are on the terrible daylight savings time. And we'll talk about that shortly as well. It is the total kinetic phase of World War III, week 13 now. A huge, historic day and night it is. That was Saturday. Now it is some days later, Wednesday. Usually I come on Sunday or Monday. That did not happen this time. It was the holiday weekend. I had a lot of personal things going on over here. So we have quite a few things to talk about as usual, especially this time when it comes to this point of the war. And it took an interesting turn that a lot of people do not really think about anymore when it comes to Ukraine and Russia. Let's see here. Where do we begin? It's been some days. So, President Trump recently, he posted a photo of a golden dome for the White House. He's put that idea out there about a golden dome for the country, though he decided to just put it up for the White House and himself in that area, uh, and nowhere else so far. Then, for the Memorial Day weekend, President Trump was at the White House trying to make some kind of deal. He was doing the negotiations and talks with several countries. So they rushed him over there to the White House and even the vice president. And then we have, around that same time, Taiwan sent over 100 Chinese ships. They have over 100 Chinese ships that entered its territorial waters over the Memorial Day weekend, while especially the West and over here in the US domestically were very distracted. So, exactly that. So it begins. The Chinese are setting up to finally invade Taiwan. There's over 100 Chinese ships outside of Taiwan right now. And as I said before, even J.D. Vance was rushed to the White House. It was him, the entire national security team was summoned to the White House. So they were all there this Memorial Day weekend. A lot is clearly going on, and there was very important things to do and talk about there. It was likely about the Chinese and to do with Iran, this possible deal that they were trying to do, which has failed as expected. There's not going to be a deal with Iran. We'll talk about that further in a moment. We also have the Trump administration and Anthropic finalizing a deal to let U.S. spy agencies use its AI tools, so especially the CIA and the FBI, the NSA. Though I don't know if that's the military entirely. I don't know if they had an agreement with the military entirely, though it seems there is a deal that's been finalized with Anthropic and spy agencies. That's interesting, a little concerning. Those agencies, for the most part, are not to be trusted at all when it comes to three-letter government agencies. And then we have this here. The US and Europe warned Ukraine that Russia is preparing to launch an attack using Oreshnik hypersonic missiles. So that was some days ago, and that's exactly what happened in recent days, the last 2 days or so. The Russians have used Oreshnik IRBMs on Kyiv, and the missile defense is running out. The missile defense in Kyiv is running out, so they're not able to intercept and stop missiles from destroying their targets in Kyiv or wherever it is in Ukraine. Then around that same time, when President Trump was in the White House with his whole national security team, there was another possible assassination attempt made on him by, I forget his name, it was one man who walked up near the White House and he he took out a handgun and started firing a few shots. Most of the Secret Service in that area fired on that shooter, and that was the end of that one, much like the last time at that dinner, except this person was outside of that gate. He didn't even breach the White House, the area. I think he was outside of the gate. He just started firing with the handgun, and he was he was taken out. So that was the end of that. It's interesting. He he just had his own motivations, and he had a lot of mental issues, as for sure. So it didn't seem to be a sleeper cell that was attacking. They would do that much better. There was a report about a sleeper cell planning to assassinate President Trump's one of his family members, Ivanka Trump. He had like blueprints of her home and much more of a setup, and they got that guy. So they do things more planned, and they have a higher chance of succeeding when it comes to IRGC agents. There was a guy who was planning to do that to Ivanka Trump as a form of revenge against President Trump for taking out Soleimani years ago and most of the regime that's there in Iran now. And then it was reported here, there's that report here, that Russia did launch a hypersonic missile strike at Ukraine near Kyiv. Yes, they did. They fired the IRBM, that Oreshnik missile. They fired that at Kyiv, and it destroyed its targets in that area. So the missile defense is running out near Kyiv and all of Ukraine. So that's going to be a huge problem for Ukraine. Ukraine may be nearing a time for its surrender. They might surrender or be destroyed before they do, since their missiles are running out and they're getting hit with the Reshniks now. And Russia is about to move in on Ukraine, especially Kyiv, and finally capture their capital city, Kyiv. They are setting up near that Belarusian border, as we've talked about recently, and they're also setting up on the other side of the Belarusian border to go into the Baltic states, those NATO countries. I think there was even a report of drone strikes on them, on those very NATO countries. So it's rapidly escalating and intensifying, and the Chinese and the Russians are just about to make their huge moves as they've been setting up and preparing for quite a while now. During this whole time, the US and Israel and some other countries have been very involved in the Middle East. They are preparing to do their strikes and invasions on the countries that they want to. Russia and China invading the countries they want to. Russia invading more of NATO and taking more NATO countries, and China going after Taiwan and attempting to take Taiwan, which likely won't end well for China. Even with the 100 ships, I expect a lot of NATO to get involved with that, especially the US and Japan and maybe Australia. Australia may be out, as Australia is likely collapsing from their gas shortages, their oil and gas shortages there. So that's a whole nother thing. We don't know if it's not likely that Australia can even do that, since they don't have oil and gas to do so. Then we have this interesting bit of news here from Leading Report. Gen Z, apparently my generation, or I'm like a Gen Z millennial, though Gen Z are burned out and taking many retirements as a break from the demanding rat race. That's also from the New York Post. So more people, especially around my age and around my generation, are taking many retirements. They're taking breaks away from slaving in the slave system, the rat race as they called it. It's a slave system in this society. And they are seeing that there's more to life than work, and there's more to life than slaving away, working during one of the most difficult financial times in American history and modern history overall. It is the most expensive time in American history right now, along with the oil and gas shortages that are increasing as time goes on, and the price of fuel is also increasing as time goes on. So it is a very difficult time, and a lot of people around my generation and age are taking breaks at least from the insane slave system, since so many end up working and they're working very hard and then they end up with nearly nothing to after working and paying all sorts of bills, and they're just slaving away. It's almost like working for free because they're just slaving, and then they end up with almost no money left over. And especially around my age, they cannot afford to actually buy a house because everything is more expensive than it's ever been, and all of these other things that are happening. So that's an interesting realization that the younger generation is realizing. It's a very interesting realization and bit of news there. I said there's a chance I'll retire until the collapse before or after summer. That's yet to be seen, decided. A lot to think about. Something like that is a difficult thing to still do, nonetheless. And then we will see here, we have another interesting bit of news that scientists, after all of this time, which in ancient Egypt they've discovered it thousands of years ago themselves, um, scientists are coming out anyway and actually admitting that they discovered a third eye hidden in the human body, and the reason it's there. It's near it's really right around the pineal gland, or it's like the pineal gland itself. As for physically, it's it's right around there. It has a lot to do with the pineal gland. Um, that's what they mean by the third eye, and it looks much like that, much like the Eye of Horus. That's what it looks like. That eye, that shape, it's like the exact shape in that part of the brain. And scientists are coming out and saying that they discovered that, yet ancient Egypt, especially, they discovered that thousands of years ago, that that is the case as well. That that is exactly what it is. There's a third eye there, and it is a it it operates kind of that way too. It doesn't work the same way as um, it works differently than how the eyes we use, though it is what they say, a third eye that's hidden in the human body. It's in the brain. That's exactly what that is. Very interesting. Also, a very interesting, huge bit of news there. A disclosure, a truthful thing that scientists have come out and said for people. And then we have this here. We've had a report from Bricks News and other reports that I've seen around then. It's about 2 days ago. That there were loud explosions heard around the Strait of Hormuz. That was what the Iranian state media was reporting. Then I said, yep, there are reports that are out there saying Iran is being attacked. Negotiations for a deal with the IRGC failed as expected. It's very expected. Um, President Trump, we'll talk about. I think I might have put it up here. No, I didn't. Though President Trump said that unless several countries, um, sign on to the Abraham Accords, that there will not be a deal with Iran. So President Trump wants all of those countries there to sign onto that peace agreement, though most of those countries there know how evil Israel has become, and they will not sign some kind of peace agreement and thing that will prevent them from doing so, that will prevent them from doing what they want to do or need to do, really, when it comes to Israel and defending themselves or taking out the threat, the global threat that Israel is, and destroying them. Israel, their government at least, needs to be, the Israeli government is an absolute threat to the world and especially the Middle East. So, of course, the other countries in the area are not going to sign on to the Abraham Accords that has to do with Israel and like submitting to them in a way by signing on to that. That is crazy. Um, that's what President Trump and Netanyahu agreed on. So there's not going to be a deal because of that, and because the Iranians will not surrender. They're not going to surrender. Um, they'll sooner be destroyed than surrender. And they're not going to give up their nuclear capabilities overall when it comes to Iran. They're not going to give up their nuclear research and their capabilities for the weapons purposes and the other purposes of nuclear, such as power solutions. And then we have this here. So the Ukrainians have been sending a lot of drone swarms at Moscow and other critical infrastructure for quite some time now. And it has gotten so intense, especially after the recent attacks Russia did on Kyiv, that the the drone swarms the drone swarms got so intense on Moscow that Russia told the the banks to arm staff and shoot down Ukrainian drones themselves. That's how desperate Russia is when it comes to the drone swarms attacking their country, especially the Moscow area. So that's crazy desperation right there. Uh, both sides, the Russians and the Ukrainians, are having a very hard time right now. They've been on the brink of collapse for some time. The oil and the gas in Russia it's down like 50% now, because Ukraine has been sending drones into almost all of the critical oil and gas infrastructure for months, uh, maybe a year or more now. They've been doing that. Ukraine has not stopped fighting back. Ukraine has not stopped fighting during this whole time when the focus has been more on the Middle East. So the war between Ukraine and Russia is at a very interesting point. Both sides are fighting quite desperately now, and Russia intends to actually completely destroy Kyiv now, whether it's just with missiles or missile attacks and some kind of ground invasion. So we will see exactly what the Russians do and how the Ukrainians defend, and all that Ukraine does at this point in the war is it seems to be nearing its end, and one side or the other is going to win that war. And it's looking more like Russia's going to win because the air defense is failing around Kyiv and Ukraine. That's huge, and they're not really being supported, not even half as much, if at all, by the U.S. and NATO. So Ukraine might lose the war. There's a very good chance, and Russia could soon occupy Kyiv, and they have occupied most of the Donbass, which is where most of Europe's resources are, in the Donbass in Ukraine. And Europe has a heavy reliance on Ukraine, their resources. So it's it's very critical and strategic for Europe to get those resources from Ukraine. So if Ukraine loses, then Europe, the rest of Europe, is very heavily reliant and dependent on U- Ukraine and Russia. On Russia, really, not just Ukraine. Ukraine will be like occupied by Russia, it seems, if that happens. So if Ukraine loses and Russia takes Kyiv and controls the Donbass region of Ukraine and all of those resources, Europe will have a full, almost a total reliance on Russia for the resources, since Russia will control most of the world's resources and most of the resources in Europe entirely. So we will see how the war continues over there in the coming hours and days in the time ahead. Speaking of time, we have this here. A sleep scientist has warned Congress that they are getting the science exactly backwards on permanent daylight saving time. Dr. Wendy Troxel tells Fox News Digital that permanent DST would force Americans to wake up in the middle of their biological night every night. Oh, every single day, creating chronic misalignment between internal clocks and the external world. The US tried this once before in the 1970s. It lasted less than a year before being repealed after morning car crashes spiked and parents revolted over kids commuting to school in total darkness. So permanent daylight savings time cannot happen. We need to get rid of daylight savings time, as that is what it results in, and other health issues. And yeah, children and people walking around in the dark in the early morning hours. So we need permanent standard time and not mess with the how time is measured. It's already somewhat messed with when it comes to the calendars. So we need permanent standard time. Daylight savings time is terrible for people. It is a terrible thing overall, and the only thing about it that is good is how the name of it sounds, daylight savings time. So it's just something that sounds good, that is not good at all. So we need permanent standard time, as it'll be much better for daylight and everything. Really, it'll be a much better thing to have permanent standard time and get rid of the nonsense that is daylight savings time. then as I said earlier, here's a actual report that President Zelensky of Ukraine, he sent Trump an urgent letter warning of critical missile defense shortages in Ukraine. So they are short. They are having shortages of their missile defense systems. So they are soon going to be unable to defend against the near constant missile attacks that Russia does on Ukraine, which is all the more reason why that could lead to a potential surrender of Ukraine and them losing the war, since they won't be able to defend from the near constant missile barrages from Russia. And then they're likely going to get that ground invasion from the eastern Belarus side, where they're staged and about to do that. It's very likely they'll do that ground invasion on the capital of Ukraine, Kyiv. And then we have this here. President Trump on the Strait of Hormuz. Some reason, this is one of the most insane things he said recently. Oman, which I think they've been a mediator throughout this war, he said that Oman will have to behave or we'll blow them up. So President Trump is now saying that he's threatening to blow up Oman, which, if I remember correctly, they've been a mediator throughout this whole war. He's threatening to blow them up. He's threatening other Gulf countries and countries in the Middle East very much the same way Israel does now. He's very much aligned with Israel. Israel may have some kind of control over him. There are theories on that. He's very aligned with Israel, and it's very clear by his threats on destroying an entire country, an entire Gulf state, by the Strait of Hormuz. So he's threatened to destroy Iran that way, and now he's threatened to destroy Oman that way. So there is no peace now. There is war, and things are rapidly escalating and intensifying, as we have clearly talked about here tonight. I will be continuing to watch very closely and vigilantly the activity with Russia and Ukraine, and I'll be looking into more news, especially on what China is doing with Taiwan and what else happens with the war in the Middle East, as it is clearly intensifying and there is no deal. So, as always, keep on preparing physically, mentally, and spiritually, and also love, light, and blessings to you all.